These are the best performing stocks in human history.
NVIDIA, Amazon, Google, Microsoft.
Yeah.
I don't think there is anywhere in the world where something went up 100 million times in 15 years. It's crazy.
There's nothing even in the same order of magnitude as that growth.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
When I saw that video, I had this intuition that Bitcoin was like that. It was like a living organism.
Right.
And I found my first power law.
The common thread between organisms, organizations, cities, and now Bitcoin, the internet, these things are all network architectures.
Our intuition tells us that there is something different about Bitcoin. It's not like a normal asset. So physicists really get excited when we find this universal pattern, because this is what really physics is all about.
This is begging the question, right? When do we hit $1 million?
To answer your question, when we are going to hit $1 million, it turns out to be...
Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Bitcoin is the fastest growing asset in human history, so far as I know. And you have laid out a framework for Bitcoin's growth that involves what are called power laws.
Correct.
Now, power laws are not unique to Bitcoin. This is something that is prevalent, really universal perhaps, in the realm of anything that grows, right? As we have Jeffrey West's book here, Scale, which we have both read. I've had Jeffrey on the show. We did 4 episodes together.
That is amazing.
The subtitle of this book, The Universal Laws of Growth, Innovation, Sustainability, and the Pace of Life in Organisms, Cities, Economies, and Companies. So there are growth patterns that are persistent across organisms, organizations, cities, etc. And these patterns are defined by power laws. And you are using power laws to define or look at, evaluate the growth pattern of Bitcoin itself. So given that we're going to be talking a lot about power laws today and the Bitcoin power law, why don't we start with some definitions specifically of power law itself? What is a power law?
So one of the things that we do in physics all the time, right? We are trying to find the relationship between things. In fact, my countryman, Galileo, he was the one saying that nature is a book, and this book is written in the language of mathematics, right? So whenever we study a phenomena, one of the first things that we do as physicists, we collect data and we make some diagram, right? We say, okay, I have this quantity. For example, we have these very bright lights here. I want to look at the temperature of whatever is producing the light, right? The filament or a star or whatever, and the intensity of light, right? So make a graph. If I did that, I would look, if I change the temperature and then I see how the intensity of light changes. If I do that, I will start to see some kind of a pattern. Now that pattern with many times is a straight line. So for example, if you have a gas and you have a pressure and temperature, so that is one of the easiest relationship that you can find, right?
Right,
a simple,
1-to-1.
1-to-1, right? And even that is actually a power law. I will explain why it is, but it's a very particular case of power law. Some other times you see exponential. So you see that the graph curve is growing very, very fast. Now, to reveal that is an exponential, what you will have to do is to take the log of a y-axis. If you do the log of a y-axis, it turns out, because the log is almost like the inverse of an exponential. So you basically neutralize it and it looks like a straight line. So that is actually a way of detecting that your data is exponential.
Right.
Now, there is one other category that I will say is so common that we have almost an internal joke in physics. Found one time a T-shirt that said, I went to a physics conference and all what I got was a lousy power law. Because we are so common that a lot of work in physics is about revealing these power laws.
Sure.
So in that case, the graph will still look curved somehow, but to reveal that is a power law, you will do the log of the y-axis and the log of the x-axis. And in that case, it looks like a straight line.
Right.
Now, in general, that means that there is a nonlinear relationship because you are revealing there is a straight line using the logs, and logs are about nonlinear relationships.
Yeah. So again, the linear is the one. So if x-axis increases 1, y-axis increases 1, makes a perfectly diagonal line.
Correct.
That would be linear, right? One-to-one relationship. You're saying a non-linear relationship. So as x increases 1, y increases more than 1.
Yeah, so let's make an example that everybody's familiar with. For example, a parabola, right? You study parabola in middle school. So parabola means y equal x squared, right? So a relationship of this type where you have y related to x with a power, that little 2, that is called the power.
To the power
By the
of
way,
2,
a lot of people get turned off by this power law, thinking that, it's a eternal law, etc. In physics, law in this case means a pattern. So it's a reliable pattern, something that you observe over and over
Cuts
again.
across domains and scales,
Exactly.
etc. Yep.
So and this power, because you can have a different definition. It's a little bit like when lawyers have their own technical terms, like in science, we like our own very precise
More
term.
like a principle.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So power in this case means that exponent, right? So this is why power.
Yeah.
Now, it's good that Bitcoin is a power law because it's powerful too, right?
Yes,
Bitcoin is so I love it also because of that, the power law of Bitcoin. But so if there is a relationship of this kind where the one quantity is related to the other by a power, then it's called a power law. And that power doesn't have the parabola. Everybody is familiar, because we studied in school. We know how to plot it and all the properties. But that number can be anything. It can be above 1, and when you talk with Jeffrey West, probably explained you, right? They are called superlinear relationship, or that number can be below 1, and then they are sublinear relationship. They are behaving in a different way, and they describe different things. In the case of Bitcoin, is a superlinear relationship because it turns out that power is actually close to 6 for Bitcoin. So in general, that number can also be negative, because if it is negative, then it means that it is inversely proportional. Like, for example, with gravity, the force of gravity is inversely proportional to the square of a distance, right? So what does it mean? So, for example,
exponential decay, right?
It's not exponential, it's a power law. It's a power law decay with the square. So, for example, if I double the distance, now the force goes down by 4. If I triple, it goes down by 9. You see, the nonlinearity is a multiplicative effect. You get a lot by a little. By little, when you change by a little, the x quantity, the y quantity changes by a lot.
This is the same like the luminosity of a star, right? So like you double the distance, so for example, but the surface area goes...
Yeah, the luminosity of a star goes with the 4th power of a temperature.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you double the temperature of a star, right? So our sun is about 5,000 degrees, the surface temperature, right? Inside is millions, but outside the surface temperature is about around 5,000, like a bulb. This is why they look yellowish. Now, if you double the temperature and you go to 10,000, you don't get 2 times the light, you get 16 times the light because you have to do 2 to the 4. So you see that power give us a lot by changing a little. And that is very important for Bitcoin because the power law that we discover in Bitcoin is between price and time. First of all, how beautiful, right? What is money? Well, for sure, money is related to time. And in Bitcoin is 1-to-1 relationship, but is not linear, is a power. So it's actually a little change in time gives you this enormous change in price, right? In fact, the power is 6. What does it mean? is very close to 6, it turns out, empirically, when you measure it, right? So price equal time to the 6, or proportional to time to the 6. So if you wait, let's say you hold it for 10 years, right? And then you hold it for another 10 years, so you double the time. That means that by holding 2 times longer, you get 64. You see? Because 2 to the 6, it's enormous. It's 64.
64x.
So
Wow.
3 times, like let's say now you wait 30 years, right? Instead of 10 years, it goes to 720.
Wow.
So because 3 to the 6 is 720.
Right.
So it's a multiplicative effect.
So the Bitcoin power law, as you've described it then, is a story about Bitcoin adoption, but told in the language of mathematics. Basically, you're describing how the Bitcoin network is expanding and proliferating and monetizing, but you're telling this story in a mathematical language, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I actually didn't know how I discovered the first power laws, because I actually revisit some of my old Facebook posts, because these were I am a scientist, right? So I wanted to understand things from a scientific point of view. But I also, when I became a Bitcoiner, so it was around 2012, I wanted to I realized that there is a social aspect of it, right? There were at that time, X was not very active. It was more Facebook. So I actually was one of the founders of one of the most active Bitcoin groups. So I was posting there all the time. And I revisit some of my posts. Like there was one from end of September 2013. And in that post, I say, I just watched this video from this very cool physicist, Jeffrey West, and he's talking about cities and how they are living organisms, and the streets are like the blood system, the circulatory system, and the city has a heartbeat, etc. But he's using all this poetry, but also backing up with graphs and math, etc. And when I saw that video, I had this intuition that Bitcoin was like that. It was like a living organism.
Right.
And so I immediately downloaded all the on-chain parameters like addresses and transaction, etc. And I found my first power law that was between price and addresses. It was this beautiful power law. And I posted about that, right? And I was so happy. I said, see, my intuition was right. There is this beautiful relationship. It is something, like you say, it's a universal pattern in nature. And so to me, immediately meant that Bitcoin was unique. It was not like NASDAQ. It was not like gold. It was something very, very unique with other type of property. In fact, I immediately understood that it had to do with networks, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the common thread between organisms, organizations, cities, and now Bitcoin, the internet, these things are all network architectures.
Architecture.
So you're describing the growth patterns that are inherent to network architectures.
Exactly. So I immediately understood that it had to do with the fact that Bitcoin is better understood as a network, right? Yeah. Why? Because, you have been to the conference. How many conferences there are like that with fanatical people, of all age, 17 years old, and
all over the
from
world.
different, all the world, etc., about NASDAQ. I don't think so, right? You don't have that passion and enthusiasm, etc. It's a real social network, probably one of the strongest, and with a lot of passion, with a lot of talent, and a lot of money also, right?
It's funny you say that, because I've actually, one of the definitions I've thought of money that was useful is it's the original social network.
Exactly, right? It's how we connect.
Yes.
It's amazing how they found shells, right? They were from the coast all the way to communities that were like inland by thousands of miles, right? And even in ancient and primitive time, right?
Across language barriers, across ethnic barriers.
They found Roman coins all the way to China, that they ended up there somehow, It's incredible. This is what drives communication and exchange, and it doesn't matter if you don't speak the language. You see that gold coin, you recognize
money talks.
It talks, exactly. So it's incredible how what I'm saying all the time, that the power law is a mathematical expression of a lot of intuition that Bitcoiners have, like you included, right? You have this beautiful intuition about what money is and what Bitcoin is, and the sailor, talking about cities. Well, power laws are driving the economy of cities. In the number of gas stations in a city is a power law. The GDP of a city is a power law, right?
Yes.
How fast somebody walks in a city is a power law.
Yes.
So cities that is the physics of immortality, right? It is also what Jeffrey West says, because company, differently from power laws, are exponential instead, right? Like, remember, he says all the time how cities are eternal and companies they die, because they grow very fast, and then that growth cannot be sustained and they collapse. That is one of the things that I'm a little sad when people don't like the power law, because they will like an unbridled exponential growth. It is not good for Bitcoin, because power laws are about sustainability. It's a perfect balance between a fast growth and the right progression and the right proportionality of growth, in such a way that all the resources around that phenomena are used properly.
Yeah. So as you said earlier, the Bitcoin power law is an optimal growth path, because you're growing as fast as possible, without growing so fast that you self-destruct. Basically.
So many times I'm starting to try to find analogies, almost the difference between an atomic bomb, right, where you have this chain reaction and this an exponential chain reaction, literally, and then it's destructive because you're releasing all this energy all at once, and it can have its purpose, is a weapon, whatever, but it's destructive. Hopefully we never use it again. Is a deterrent, fine, but this is how atomic bombs work. And then you have like a nuclear reactor, where you have a same type of reaction, and literally they put materials in between, the radioactive material to slow it down. They actually trying to, it's almost like you have a car, and a car will not be a good car if you add only the accelerator, right? And the accelerator will make it go faster and faster and faster, and then you crash, right? You want a good car needs to have a brake, right? And this is what Bitcoin has. It has both the accelerator and the brake, and when you combine these two things, you have a power law. It's beautiful.
That's beautiful. What can we go to the slides actually, and you have prepared a very comprehensive deck, let's say, that includes examples, obviously from Jeffrey's book, Scale, and then a number of power law relationships that you've identified inside of Bitcoin. We're going to go into some of these images that are from your deck, and then we will make the deck available in the show notes for those that are interested to see all of it. It's like 140 plus slides, so we can't go through all of them. We're starting here on slide 4. What are we looking at here? This looks like the Bitcoin price.
So it's a question of noise and signal, right? That is another important theme in science. What is your signal? What you're trying to show. So many times when you have a phenomena that changes a lot in the y-axis, because Bitcoin, you were talking about in the beginning, is the fastest growing asset. I want to remind people that literally Bitcoin went up from the first USD transaction. There was 5,000 Bitcoin for $1. Can you imagine? So actually, that will be the best use of my physics degree, to make a time machine so we can go back and buy some Bitcoin at that time. That would be really cool. But so if you consider that transaction to where we are right now, we are talking about 100 million times. So I bet we can research it. I mean, you love history. I love history. I don't think there is anywhere in the world where something went up 100 million times in 15 years. It's crazy. It's unbelievable crazy.
I don't think it's even, there's nothing even in the same order of magnitude as that growth.
It's unbelievable. So usually when you have something like that, you want to use the log. And what is the log? Log is a very simple idea, right? So basically in science, we like to describe numbers. So if you want to go to the next slide, we like to describe numbers with their exponent, right? So in particular, when we have like this very huge range of values, right? Here in this graph, we don't go all the way to the first transaction because they were like irregular, there was not an exchange. So it starts here, the graph starts when the first exchange is starting. But even there, you can see we are talking about -1, but in this case is a 10 to the -1. So it's actually a fraction of a dollar, right? Bitcoin was a fraction of a dollar. So when you have a change like that from a fraction of a dollar all the way to almost $100,000, you want to write a number in scientific notation. So scientific notation means I write 10, and that is 10 to the 1. Then I write 100 as 10 to the 2.
6 times 10 to the 2, 6 times 10 to the 3.
Exactly.
And it's basically saying the number of zeros.
Million will be, I take 10 to the 6 times, right? 10 to the 6, it will be a million.
So the exponent represents the number of zeros behind the
number
digit.
of zeros.
Yeah.
And the log gives you the exponent. So if I take the log of 10, the log 10 of 10, it gives me 1. If I take the log of 100, I get 2, right? It gives me basically, it's almost like you're thinking it's a box.
It's like an inverse exponent.
Right. It gives you back the exponent.
Yeah.
So this is what I brought here in this graph. You see in the y-axis is all the exponents. So 0, 1, 2. So 0 represent 1.
So
$1.
each line's an order of magnitude growth, which is another 0.
So people, I don't know why people
and so this, now you can see the entire Bitcoin price history in sort of a, I guess it's a proportionate lens in terms of exponents. Whereas if you looked at it on a linear graph, you wouldn't even see the first price move, right? Because it's
flat,
so tiny,
right? It looks so flat. But now it makes it proportional, exactly like you to say, to where Bitcoin was at every particular point. Because now you're focusing on the scale, right? So 1, 2, 3, the scales are organized in a linear fashion in this case. And so everything is proportional because that is actually, if you had to summarize the power law, it's about proportionality. This is why the book is called Scale, right? You are scaling up a phenomena in a way where all the different magnitudes, all the different order of magnitudes
are comparable.
Yes. That is the essence. If you need to understand one single thing about what a power law is, you need to focus on that. And the beauty is that Bitcoin decided to grow in this proportion. That is remarkable that Bitcoin found this path and say, listen, I need to be the monetary system of the world. I need to go from nothing to $100 trillion worth. How I'm going to do it? Of course, I'm going to do it in a scale variable way. That is the best path because nature likes that growth that is proportional in terms of scale. And it's amazing that Bitcoin, through his own internal intelligence of a network, the interactions, decided to do that, right? At least up to now, 15 years. That is history of Bitcoin. So this first graph shows you already started to see some order and some very precise pattern, even if you just take the log of a y-axis. So we are keeping the x-axis linear, but we are taking the log of a y-axis. And you already see there is this beautiful curve, right? The rainbow chart, etc. It looks nice.
What are these channels we're looking at?
So I already plotted the power law. It's a kind of a preview. It's a spoiler but the power law starts to look is not yet the straight line that I'm going to show in a moment. It's curved, right? Because actually it's an artifact of this type of graph where you take the log. So anything that is not exponential will look curved. It's like kind of losing ground relatively to an ideal exponential because if Bitcoin was an exponential, it would look like a straight line in this particular graph. And you can see it doesn't, right? So anybody that says, Bitcoin is exponential, it's not exponential. You can see that it's doing this curve. So if it was, it would look like a straight line in a log linear, what is called a log linear chart. And it doesn't. It clearly bends.
So it's leveling off.
But it doesn't have, because I had also discussion with a director in Fidelity that he was talking about how there is an asymptote. There is not an asymptote. That will be a very big misconception. There is not an asymptote at all here. It will continue to grow in that direction, basically indefinitely. Now, one day, of course, if we have
an asymptote, for people that might not know, is the curve that approaches a line but never touches it, right?
Right, but it's limited by... it's almost like a ceiling, right? You never go beyond that. But there is no such a ceiling. Now, one day, if we approach, like everybody owns a Bitcoin, that curve will start to taper off. And
but in theory, there'd never be an asymptote because it's limited by human productivity and ingenuity.
Exactly, right? So it doesn't have to. It could be a power law all the way to heaven.
Forever.
It could be straight forever, until maybe...
that's Bitcoiner catnip right there, a power law all the way to heaven.
and maybe one day, the dollar will not exist because we decide let's just use Bitcoin, and then the power law ends, right? Because
you can't even denominate it in dollars at that point.
Unless you're talking about
you have to denominate it in energy or something,
maybe houses or real estate or something else, right? So. And by the way, I did it with many different currencies. In fact, at a certain point, I combined all the currencies of the world, and I gave different weights to them according to their GDP. And the power law becomes even better when you actually include everything. You can include even hyperinflationary currency because their economies are so small, so they don't impact.
Have you done this in gold yet?
I did it in gold. It's a beautiful power law there too. It works. It works with everything. It's really something universal and real. The critics of a power law they don't have almost any argument anymore. I never heard anybody making a serious attempt to attack this approach. It's really there.
Right.
Now, you can see it, right? There is these organizations. The band here represents deviations from the general power law trend. You can see that the green line, that is about 60% deviation from the trend. And it forms almost like a support line. And we never go down. We will have a better slide to show that. That has to do with something really physical about the system, because Bitcoin is also related. It's not just people networking together. It's also all these machines, right? The mining machines, the energy that is put in the system. So, like sailors say, thermodynamics, energy, etc. And it turns out, actually, a little bit of a spoiler, that even hash rate is a power law. And so
the foundation of this support line is a real economic quantity, right? Which is basically the production cost per Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
And that, like other commodities, the market value tends to not go much below the production cost.
But with Bitcoin, because everything is so beautiful and regular, is actually a nice line, right? You can
and this intuitively makes sense, right? Because if the market value is below the production cost, well, then producers stop producing.
Exactly.
Right?
Or producing or selling, right? We are not selling.
Right, they're not selling. So then that puts upward pressure on price to bring it back to production costs.
And in fact, I did a lot of studies because, believe me, almost every day I wake up and spend like 12 hours understanding Bitcoin scientifically every single day. And so I did a causality test, where it's called Granger causality, where I plot what leads what. And for example, you can show that hash rate leads price at the bottom.
Through
this causality test.
Does that change at market tops then?
At market tops, it goes the other way around, where price actually leads hash rate.
So you're you are giving credence to the feedback loop then.
Exactly.
That it actually does.
And in fact, at the top, there is a decoupling. It's all FOMO. The price just does its own thing. And hash rate cannot keep up because, you need to buy new machines, etc. It's much slower. They don't go and start to increase hash rate simply because the price goes crazy. And you can see that. You can study all these things. It's really like a science. You can publish papers, etc.
This September 5th through 9th, 2024, join me on the Pacific coast of Mexico for our first ever men's retreat, which we are calling The Art of Alpha. In a cooperative training environment at a world-class retreat center, we will be having daily meditations, movement practices, yoga, cold plunging, infrared sauna, lymphatic drainage, massage, heart rate variability training, gut health lectures, all while enjoying an anti-inflammatory diet, free of allergens and designed for optimal full body health. The retreat center is a gorgeous biohacker's paradise located right on the ocean. You can think of this place as a nervous system reset facility. At the Art of Alpha, we are seeking men who wish to cultivate freedom, wisdom, sovereignty, physical fitness, truth, and love in themselves and in those who look up to them. If you've always felt motivated to push yourself to new limits, to discover the best version of yourself, but you've struggled to find the right community to immerse yourself in, then the Art of Alpha is for you. You will be training alongside a group of men who have been individually selected for their outstanding self-discipline, virtue, and work ethic. To apply to join the first ever Art of Alpha event, go to breedloveevents.com. And yes, I did say you'll have to apply as we're striving to gather a select group of men for this experience. Again, that's breedloveevents.com to apply to join us for the Art of Alpha on the Pacific coast of Mexico, September 5th through 9th, 2024. Have you ever wanted to live in an off-grid community with complete food, energy, and water independence? If so, then you need to check out the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a pioneering community designed to foster longevity and well-being, eliminating elements that detract from these goals. At the farm, the convergence of nature, nutritious food, a supportive community, and the ethos of slowing down is unparalleled. Positioned at the gateway to the UNESCO World Heritage-nominated Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the farm at Okefenokee stands as a testament to a lifestyle that truly nurtures health and happiness. Unlike conventional housing developments where a token communal garden may suffice, the farm itself is the community. Small, intimate micro-villages seamlessly integrate into the fabric of a sprawling agricultural community. So if you're interested in joining this off-grid community, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about becoming a member. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on their custom cabin pricing. Again, go to okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community.
Yeah, let's look at this one. So this one is a cleaner, right? Because there are no bands. But this is the real, this is the power law that shows what happens when I take not just the log of the y-axis, but also the log of time. Mm-hmm. And this really was the biggest innovation because, and you will think, how come this came out in 2018? Because I did find the other one between price and addresses and price and transaction in 2013. But the one directly between price and time, that are two of the most fundamental things, because price has to do with value, right? That we are interested in, etc. And the other one, time, right? It shows actually they are intimately connected, one with the other, with this incredible leverage that is the power of 6, right? So a little change in time produces a huge, big change in value, right? So you get the reward.
So I want that you keep saying that, and I just want to throw out, I'm curious about this actually. So the connection to something like chaos theory, or small changes in initial conditions can have outsized changes in the outcome, right? The classic butterfly flapping its wings in Australia creates a hurricane in Florida, something like that. Yes. What is the connection there between the small changes in initial conditions and large outsized changes in the outcome?
Yeah, that all that is due to nonlinearity. So nonlinearity, it's not really a chaotic system. Right. One could try to find connections to chaos, etc., and it's something worth to be explored. But in general, it's basically this topic of nonlinear systems. So power laws are very typical of nonlinear system. Chaos theory is very typical. So every time you have something that can be amplified in that way by this nonlinearity, you will have small change producing a huge change in another variable. That is actually the definition of nonlinearity. What my emphasis on Bitcoin is that power of 6, it's extraordinary. It's like is as close fact, actually beats many exponential, because when people say exponential, well, NASDAQ is exponential, but it's a relatively slow exponential in comparison with this huge power of 6. So, on a certain point, we can show that slide where you can see that NASDAQ and gold, they look flat in comparison with Bitcoin.
Does it compare to the growth curve of the internet at all?
I didn't study that, but...
because I was just trying to think that would be the only analogy.
What I found was this Chinese paper written by these Chinese scholars, and they were studying social networks. And in fact, their point was social networks, and they study WeChat, they studied, the Los Alamos preprint, where scientists post papers before they send it to a peer review, so they can get feedback, etc. So there is this system, it's called the Los Alamos preprint. And it's a network that so we studied like 4 or 5 real life network, and we got all the data, and they showed that the nodes, and first of all, maybe we should define what a network is, right?
Yeah, please.
So a network is a system where you have components, and these components can be like, everybody's familiar with computers, right?
Yeah.
So it's a place where information is produced. So maybe there is some kind of information or some action that is being taken, by these entities.
Right.
So for example, with the human body, you can think about the human body as a network, and the cells are the nodes. They are the central points of this network, right? So you have individual entities that do certain things. They produce material, but they also, they process information, right? And then information about the state of the body, how much food there is, or whatever, what next protein needs to be produced. They have all this information, and they communicate with other entities.
Right.
So these two things together, where you have individual entities and then are connected with others, and they work as a system, as a whole, made of single individual parts, is a network. And the definition is the single parts are called nodes, and the connections are called edges. Edges or connection, whatever you want. And they exchange information, they make some decisions, they work as a whole, right? Like the body, basically, or a city, or the internet, etc. So these people studied 5 different cases of real network. We got all the information, and they show that both the nodes and the connection grow as power laws. That is really, really interesting, because a lot of people, they continue to claim, and it makes me always a little bit upset.
social networks, you're saying, right?
Sorry?
In social networks,
in
both
social
the
networks,
nodes and the edges or connections grow as power laws.
In fact,
but the edges or connections must be growing faster than the number of nodes at a higher power law.
Yes,
right.
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, because they are proportional to the number of nodes, and so they need to have, they need to grow faster. Right?
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there's some kind of relationship, right? It's going to be a power law.
Yeah.
Now, in general, the simplest possible scenario, it's a square. The square of the number of nodes turns out to be the square. The number of connection turns out to be the square of the nodes, and that is called the Metcalfe law.
Right.
But it depends on how the topology and how the network is organized. You could have like a more dense, like there are, like for example, you are like a super node, right? Because so many people watch your show and they get influenced by you. You're like a super node, and in this case, your weight on the network is much higher. So you could have geometries like that, and then the growth of the connections is different, right? In particular, if I look how many connections the supernodes grow, they grow faster. It's an entire science. It's in fact, it's almost like a branch of physics.
So there's a network density component.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So there is a physicist that kind of almost single-handedly developed this field. His name is Barabasi. He actually, another book suggestion besides scale, for people that want to go a little bit deeper, is again a popular book, very well written. It's called Linked by Barabasi, Barasi. But maybe we can put links to these readings and so on. And it showed that actually power laws are one-to-one with networks, with social networks in particular. It's like an expression of how these social networks grow. And the paper that I was reading was making a big deal that they don't follow S curves, right? Because many times we hear and say, they follow. In fact, when I was talking with the Fidelity macroeconomic person, he was making this claim, right? Maybe the people working under him, they were going with the usual thinking that is a technology, so Bitcoin needs to follow an S-curve of adoption. You are familiar with the S-curve of adoption,
the
right?
innovators adoption curve.
And that is an exponential. That is actually an exponential curve. And it turns out, no, social networks don't do that. And Bitcoin, it's a social network, and the growth is a power law. And we can show it in a moment. Because you see, once you find something like this, right? So let's discuss this graph for a moment. First of all, I discovered this later on because it took me some time, again, maybe to go behind this mental block that it was supposed to be an S-curve, because that were actually were my first models. I took the price and addresses, and then I say, okay, now how the addresses grow, of course, like an S-curve, right? And then I try to make a prediction of a model of a price of Bitcoin in the future based on this S-curve. But it was almost like fitting a round hole in a square, a round peg in a square hole, right? Whatever the
is it possible? I've seen this chart before where it overlays different technology adoption curves, and it shows, for instance, the internet was adopted more quickly than the telephone because the physical infrastructure was already in place for the internet. And then I think Bitcoin's been even steeper than the internet. So could it be that there is an S-curve still occurring, but it's just steeper and steeper and steeper? And that's why we're seeing it as a power law?
No, because it looks like a beautiful power law almost from the beginning. And in fact, there are examples of things that grow like power laws and spread like power law that are viruses. So virus infection in certain condition, and the condition needs to be that there is some kind of curbing mechanism. Like, for example, it turns out that AIDS is such a thing. Like AIDS historically grew with the cube of time.
Okay.
And instead of being an exponential, right? And the curbing mechanism in that case was the awareness, right? Because there were news about AIDS, and people took different precautions, etc. So that actually slowed down the spread. And that is what is going on with Bitcoin, that we have this viral spread. It's very fast. It goes with the cube of time. Again, you double the time, that means 8 times more. I'm using addresses as a proxy for Bitcoin. Right? It's kind of a measure of the activity of a network. So you can think that it's proportional somehow to the number of Bitcoin. And people comment, sometimes say, well, but some people open 5 addresses, but it's still proportional. So you can, it's what we have, and it's an observable.
Yeah, because it also works the other way, where one exchange will have millions of customers will be on
so
few
the two
addresses.
things balance each other. And so it's a good proxy, it's an observable. It's all what, unfortunately, we don't have to give our name when, we buy. So
that's a feature, not a bug.
It's a very good. And so we have a proxy much better than other things where you don't have no information at all. We have all this information with Bitcoin. So it's a good proxy of adoption, right? So the addresses grow with the cube of time. And it's really beautiful because it looks like one of these viruses that is curbed. Now, people could say, well, I don't like that curbing, right? Because why should it be curbed? It's actually good. It's like the nuclear reactor where you want to slow down the adoption because you want to give time for Bitcoin to grow. The infrastructure needs to grow. The miners need to buy the equipment and do it in time. You don't want an explosive growth and then the system collapse on itself because it cannot support itself. So this is actually the best possible growth as fast as possible. Come on. 100 million per in 15 years. How much do you want more than that, right? And now that it's bigger, it looks low to us, and many people are impatient because, we would like to have a growth that was in the beginning, where you could multiply by many times your wealth, right? Within few months, people will want that, but it's not good for the system.
That sounds like a feature, not a bug, too, because as you said earlier, you're training people to be lower time preference in a way, to be more patient, right? If Bitcoin just went up 100 million% every 7 years or whatever, like that wouldn't make sense.
It will not make sense.
Yeah.
It will not be the infrastructure.
And everyone would be
right now
the Lambo mentality and all of this. So it's like it actually needs to level out to mature as a global reserve asset.
Exactly, right? And so if we want... because it's a good thing that there are retirement plans based on Bitcoin. It's a good thing that there are nations, I don't want nations who own 50% of Bitcoin, by the way, or even 20. Hopefully, it's a small portion, right? But it's nice, right? That we are starting to think, let's get a strategic reserve, right? It needs to be a balance. I really don't like the 20% or said, I don't know what is your feeling about that. I think a good compromise is okay. It's good that we are interested in doing that, but I would rather people own Bitcoin than nations,
an inevitable part of Bitcoin's monetization that every human organization is going to want a piece of it.
Exactly.
Ultimately, I think there's a saying in Bitcoin, I don't know if it's entirely true, there probably are exceptions, but that everything is good for Bitcoin. So like whatever's contributing to Bitcoin's monetization, even if it is a state buying it, well, the state is sort of taking its own poison pill because it's going to demonetize
they cannot control
state revenues, like inflation, etc.
It's like Bitcoin is a warrior that is winning without fighting. It's like a Zen warrior.
Exactly.
It's like, okay, you come to me, Like, Sailor did the same thing. He was talking bad about Bitcoin when he converted. Same thing with the BlackRock. They were criticizing Bitcoin. Now they are supporting.
And like a black hole, it is unidirectional, right? Once you cross that event horizon, philosophically or cognitively with Bitcoin, there are no ex-Bitcoiners, as has been said. It's like once you go into the rabbit hole, you don't come out.
Exactly. And you know why? I have an idea about that, because if you're thinking about like an organism, think about when a cell decided to put aside, the fact of being alone and doing his own thing by itself and say, okay, I'm going to join this network. Once he did that, you cannot really leave a network because the value is in the network itself. It's different from Facebook. You can jump ship with Facebook, right? You can say, hey, there is a better place. I'm going to X, or I'm going to Nostr, I'm going somewhere else. With Bitcoin, you cannot do that. Of course, there are some people that leave, etc. But it's a minority, like you say. I think it's really a minority because you're going to lose the value, the time, the energy, the money that you put in. So you need to stay in the system, right? Because the value is in the system itself, right? It's the only place where that really happens beside organisms, or a city or whatever. When it's a big investment to be, sure, you can go to another city, but, you get adapted to the city, you live in the city, you get, your children in the school, so you become an integral part of that system, and then it's very difficult to leave that system. With Bitcoin, even more so.
Yeah, it's almost like it's damn near impossible to opt out of the social network that is money, because you get all of these advantages, right? That you get to benefit from the specialization of others as they benefit from your specialization. It makes your life easier. You participate in the division of labor. Sure, you can opt out of Bitcoin to another money, but you can't really opt out of money unless you're going to go live in a cave somewhere. And so what are we saying with Bitcoin? Is like Bitcoin's just the best money, basically. So that's why people tend to not, once you opt in, you don't opt out.
Exactly. And the power law, again, is the expression of that, right? That is needs to do that. It needs to become the monetary system of the world, and it's finding this very clever, very wise path, right? So when many times they say, when you argue against the power law, you're arguing against Bitcoin. I mean, I would like more and more people really understand the philosophy behind it, and maybe you've been very good with these things. You can help me to.
Well, hopefully this episode will help. But let's look at the next.
Yeah. So exactly. So let's go to the next slide. And so that straight line. By the way, about that straight line, if I can say a couple of things, there are some statistical tools that you can do, like the R-square. So the R-square is because it's not just like a straight line that looks like straight.
And that is the
eyes.
metric of virality, right? R
Yes.
squared.
Well, it's the metric of how good that fit is, right? From a statistical point of view. So the R-square tell us for Bitcoin is about 0.95.
Oh, wow.
That means 95% of the behavior of Bitcoin is explained by that straight line.
Wow. Okay.
And everything else is basically that oscillations that we are seeing that are associated with the bubble. Now, notice that the oscillations are going up and down relatively to the straight line. So they almost cancel.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they were not there. In fact, this graph is another way of looking at that basically, even if there are these oscillations, really the straight line is the closest representation of what Bitcoin does. Now, many people get confused about the straight line because we're thinking, really, is it straight? Well, it's straight in this weird scaling space, right? Where we are looking at how the scale of the price changes relatively to the scale of time. Now, if you go back to the linear graph, it is our minds are very linear. We have very difficult time to think about logs, etc. You get this graph. Now, what this graph is. So, first of all, the red curve is the power law.
Right.
So now,
and this looks like one
stick.
half of a parabola, as you were describing at the beginning.
It's actually a super parabola, right?
Okay.
Because it's the positive side because we don't have negative money, right? Or negative time.
And this is days since Genesis block.
Then everything, first of all, when we talk about time, we always talk about the time from the beginning of Bitcoin. That makes sense. It's the only time that makes sense. It's almost like Bitcoin.
Day zero.
It's almost like the Big Bang, right?
Yes.
It's the day when everything started, right? So you measure the time from that Genesis block,
exactly.
right? January 3, 2009. I don't remember. Do you remember the time? Was it 12 a.m. or something like that? I don't remember.
I'm not exactly
what
sure.
it was. But it was January 3, 2009.
I just remember written in the Genesis block was Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, which is just attesting to the purpose of Bitcoin. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it looks like that hockey stick, right? So it's an hockey stick. And so when people say, oh, the price went parabolic. Well, parabolic is square. This is 6. So it's a super parabolic if you want, right? So remember, we double the time, we get 64. We triple the time, we get 720. I don't remember 4 times what 4 times. We can check it out, but it's something crazy, right? So longer you wait, because of a multiplicative factor, you get this boost in value, you know? So it tells you, be patient, but I'm going to reward you with this very non-linear behavior of a price. And it looks like that J. And what you see, that black curve, is nothing else than a moving average over 4 years. And I did 4 years because it kind of tends to eliminate the bubble a little bit because we are 4 years periodic, right? You have the lows, you have the top, and they kind of almost cancel perfectly, not completely, but you can see that black line really tends to the red one, right? With some oscillations around it. So it's really, really cool. You cannot look at that graph and say, I don't think that red line is a good representation of the price of Bitcoin. It is. You know, I mean, how can you deny it? There is nothing to deny. And if I could zoom, because that is the problem with the linear graph, you could zoom there at the first days, you will still see that very, very good approximation of the behavior of the price. So this is why we get that 0.95 R squared. It's incredible, you know. And by the way, you know, I work in 3 different fields. I work in astrophysics. This is where I started, got my PhD in astrophysics. Then I went to neuroscience. I was working at Northwestern studying the brain during sleep. And then finally finance, right, through Bitcoin, because I wanted to understand Bitcoin, I look at also stock, gold, etc. So I have a pretty good experience in looking at financial data. So in these 3 different fields, when I was playing with astrophysics, in astrophysics, sometime you get 0.9, etc. You need to go to real physical phenomena to start to see that incredible correlations.
Right.
In medicine, when I was in neuroscience, if you get 0.65, 0.7,
Right.
you can publish a paper. And
Wow.
it's like people will get excited, right? In fact, I was talking with an anthropologist that I was in line at the Nashville, and we discussed it about his research, and he said, I had shivers when you show your results, because the fact, first of all, there is this scaling behavior that we found in anthropology all the time.
So is this the first thing in the social sciences you've seen with above a 0.9 R squared?
It's incredible. I challenge anybody to show me any type of
So it's a social phenomenon that exhibits the qualities of a physical phenomenon.
Exactly.
That's
This is why I have a hat, right? It says Bitcoin is a force of nature. That is the slogan, right? It is beautiful again, because to me, it's like all the things that we talk all the time as Bitcoiners, right? That Bitcoin is more like nature, it's intelligent, and it's like cities, all these things, right? That our intuition tell us that there is something different about Bitcoin. It's not like a normal asset. And now we have a mathematical proof. So I don't know why people resist this at all. You know, like there is something else going on there. I want to understand why some Bitcoin. Maybe because, we are skeptical, we want to verify, and we should verify. That is also the beauty of a power law, right? One of my collaborators, Fred Krueger, probably you know him, he made actually a challenge one time. He say, if you're a real Bitcoiner, you should plot the power law. Go and get an Excel, because you can get the data online, and this is not really, it's like middle school mathematics.
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play here, I think. One would be the herd mentality of humans, right? That we do tend to find safety in numbers. We tend to be very imitative, right? So there are a few people that most people imitate in different domains, right? In the domain of finance, maybe it's Buffett or Munger or whoever. And then so until they sort of accept the idea, then there's a large cohort of people that won't accept it. There also seems to be this thing where, lost my train of thought. So people are imitative, and then, sorry, it escaped me. Hopefully it'll come back to me.
Yeah. Or they are skeptical. That is a good thing.
Yes.
Right? And also there is this thing where many people say, well, what about a free will, right? Is it possible that humans can be described by an equation
This
like
deterministic,
this? And my answer to that is, well, there is free will. I believe in free will. I think it's a real thing, but when we work as group, like you just say, we tend to do certain things as groups, and that behavior is actually for sure described by mathematics, right? There is all this body of work of Jeffrey West about the cities, how cities grow, the GDP of a city is a power law, the number of gas stations. There is no a committee that come together and say, hey, guys, we have too few gas stations in this city because we need to follow the power law, and let's have more. It's all natural, right? It all happens.
Emergent properties.
Yeah, it's an emergent property. And how do you get power laws mathematically? Whenever, in fact, you can write an equation. You can show, and I use these equations because I went deeper. Right now, we are much beyond just drawing some lines on a graph. I did models. I used differential equations. In that paper that I mentioned about the social networks, we had like a nice equation that you can use and try to make simulations of different networks, basically being open to any possible solutions. And I did it with Bitcoin, and the solution that comes from this simulation, it's a power law, right? The nodes are a power law, the connections are a power law, without drawing the power law directly, just from the simulation. But the equations, if you look at how these differential equations look like, basically we have an input, like for example...
Are those the ones on the slide?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
They are somewhere, and I can send you the graph, and you will see there, because they are very beautiful. What happens with these equations is...
Is this something Jake could pull up online?
Oh, you can go down. I can show you if you really go down at a certain point.
No,
maybe what you want to do. If you can show me the list, like on the right, usually there's like a long list of all the.
Oh, can you show him
what I'm talking about?
Can you show him the slide, the column of slides on the left?
Yeah, the columns of slides, like the summary. of his slides. But in that equation, maybe we can find it.
Or you could just Google. Is it just differential
Do you know
equations?
what you can do? If you go under bitposeidon.com. That actually I'm going to make some advertisement about my website, because by the way, everybody that wants to go a little bit deeper should go to this website. It's called bitposeidon.com.
Bitposeidon?
Yeah, mostly because, it's the idea that we have these waves.
Okay.
Yeah, the dude riding the waves.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
So this is my newsletters. In fact, if you want to subscribe. And then go under modeling Bitcoin growth with network theory. Okay, that is really cool. First of all, you see these are real network in this graph. If you go down, you can zoom in. These are two examples. If you go up first. So you see these are the nodes. The blue are the nodes, and the red ones are the links, the connections, right? And this is for WeChat. You see how they grow as power laws? These are beautiful power laws, the real ones.
Now, I would have expected the connections to grow faster than the nodes.
Right.
Is that correct?
Okay. No. The nodes, I did it the other way around. The nodes are the red. Thank you for.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Got it.
The nodes go
links are blue. Got it.
They have a slope of 2 point something, and the other one 3 point something. Right. That are the links. You're right. Thank you so much. And you see how they are a beautiful straight line?
Yeah.
Both of them. And then you have the Los Alamos preprint arXiv, right? Where you find all these scientific papers for free. Actually, it's very good because it's not beyond a paywall. It's one of the nice free things. And in that case, you see there is some tapering, right? There is a little bit of tapering because probably we are reaching a limit of how many possible connections we can have. So so the beauty of this paper is that they write these equations that are the general equations that are describing the growth of nodes and link in a network.
Yeah.
And it can give you S-curve, it can give you power laws, it can give you exponential. So it's kind of neutral in terms of which possible solutions. And then you run it like they did it, and you say the possible closest solution to the real data that I have, and this is what they get here, right?
So you get like a line of best fit, basically.
In this case, the power law is the best fit, right? Because, but it's more than the best fit because you are simulating step by step, and I say, okay, I'm open to any possible solution, not just power laws, but in this case, the power law is the best way.
Got it.
And if you scroll down, so I wrote this entire article showing how this is relevant for Bitcoin. So basically, I did. So this is the equation. So if we can spend 1 second on this equation, because we don't have to go through all the details, but it's one of these typical equations that we use in physics to describe motion and evolution of whatever system. So basically, on the left side, you have the change. What they mean, that n is the nodes, right? So in the n, the t means the change in the nodes over time. So I'm trying to calculate step by step. In fact, you can do it almost like in a computer program. You can do a for loop, and you say every step represents a day. So I'm going to calculate how many nodes are created tomorrow, from where I'm starting today. In a sense, you can think that these n are Bitcoiners. How many Bitcoiners we are red pilling today, right? Orange pilling today. So how many orange pilling we are going to do today? That is the critical idea. That depends on the right sides. It's basically your initial conditions when we're talking about is NT. So it tells you the change in number of Bitcoiners that we are going to get today depends on how many Bitcoiners there are already there, right? Makes sense? In the day one, how many Bitcoiners we had? Only one, Satoshi, right? So Satoshi was there. In fact, if you run this as simulation, you can say, hey, start with, that is your initial condition, start with one Bitcoiner, Satoshi, right? Yeah. So, and then you say, how many Bitcoiners I got in day two? And that equation tells you. And it tells you it needs to be proportional to the number of Bitcoiners that you had in the beginning, NT, right? That beta represents the rate, and it turns out that for Bitcoin, that number beta is 3.
Got it.
So basically, the number of Bitcoiners every day as a group, we orange peel 3 people, multiplied by
and
the
so
number
that's
of
something
us.
like roughly equivalent to the R squared you were describing. I'm sorry, not
The cube
okay,
growth of the addresses.
What was the ratio for virality, right? Where you were describing the AIDS, how it spread to
Cube.
the cube. Okay.
Yeah. And this is the same thing, that beta is 3.
Got
now, on the when you see how it's divided by time.
Yeah.
So now, if it was exponential, so there is the parameter theta. So if theta is 0, that means...
And what is theta?
Theta is that you see is very small, but it's t to the theta. So it's a very clever equation. By changing the theta, I allow any possible solution. I can have an exponential. I can have an S curve.
So it's a variable.
So it's a variable that tells you which kind of growth we have.
Okay.
And so if it was 0, for example, so t to the 0 is 1, because anything to the 0 is always 1.
Yeah.
So that t basically will disappear.
Yeah.
And in that case, that is when you get an exponential. So an exponential is any time you triple something or double something, and you do it in a consistent way. So if every day we really got 3 new people multiplied by the number of us, of existing Bitcoiners, we will have an exponential growth.
Sure.
But it turns out when you actually feed the data, the real addresses, the algorithms say, no, the theta needs to be 1. And the 1 means now you're dividing by time. And the time is the braking mechanism, is the curbing mechanism.
So it is leveling out.
So it's leveling. It's not leveling out to say, I'm going to grow very fast because more and more of us there are, more Bitcoiners, new Bitcoiners we are going to get. But also, I'm going to slow down this process with time, inversely proportional to time.
Right.
And you have both in that way. You get this how you get the power law. Yeah. That is the difference. And
because there's only 8 billion people to orange pill.
Yeah, so plus it needs time to build the infrastructure for people to think about it. And it's a conscious process, right? It takes time to get orange pills, because it
takes work.
It takes work, etc. If it was like something that happened, this is how you get shit coins. People just jump in without thinking, doing stupid things. This is why it's nice to have it.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. The next one we were going to look at, 10 and 11? Or did we already see this? Yeah, so speaking of equations, you have some...
equations so this is the general equation that describe what power laws are, right? So
while you're going through the mathematics of this, I think it would also be useful, so we don't get too mired in pure mathematics.
Yes.
Describing some of the stuff that Jeffrey West lays out in this book, where he describes like the number of heartbeats per organism is basically the same across all, mice to elephants.
Yes.
But the mouse's heartbeat is faster, therefore its life is shorter.
Yeah.
So like these relationships hold in a lot of domains. So something to bring it back to earth here.
Exactly. So in general, what does it mean, right? When you have a power law, it means that you have a relationship of this kind, right? Where you have a y equal x, right? And that a is some kind of proportionality quantity, and then to the power. In the case of Bitcoin, I say 666, but it's really 5.83 if you measure, because never is perfect exactly, like round numbers, but very close to 6. And then you have this 10 to the minus 17. Why is 10 to the minus 17? Because basically, if it's really, you can use this equation for Bitcoin where you can say, hey, give me the number of days from when Bitcoin was created. I will give you a reference price. It's kind of like the fair price for Bitcoin. And you can say, well, what was the price at day one, right? So 1 to the power of kind of 6, right? 1 times 1 times 1 is 1, right? And then you multiply by that very small number, 10 to the minus 17 is 0 with 16 zeros, 1. So basically Bitcoin was like nothing, right? It was almost nothing.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, well, all right, how much time did it take for the price to be $1, right? So you can also answer the question, like you can try to plug in their days until basically you get 1. It turns out to be 880 days. So if you plug in that equation, 880 days, you get $1. Now, if you go and look at when Bitcoin really became $1, it was February 11, 2011. So it took about 915 days, something like that. So the equation say 880 days. The real Bitcoin took 915.
Wow.
And so you can try with $100, $1,000. You always are within few weeks, a few months.
This is begging the question, right? When do we hit $1 million?
Right. And today, for example, if you put 5,500 days, right now we are, right, you get something like 65 because right now we are really touching that straight line at the moment. Like, since February, we are hovering around the power law. So the price is really tracking the real price right now. This equation tracks. Now, to answer your question, when we are going to hit $1 million, it turns out to be 2033.
2033.
And in general, you can also think in this way, right? Remember, we say if we double the time, it's going to be 65 times. So let's double the time of existence of Bitcoin, which is 15 years. So if you go all the way to 15 years in the future, that will be 2040, right? We are talking about 65 times. So if it is about 65,000 right now, so $4.5 million, something like that. So in 15 years from now, will be about $4.5 million. Now, at the conference, Saylor show all these possible scenarios in 45, and you had like the bear case scenario, you had the bull case scenario. The middle one was $13 million for Bitcoin in 45. This equation says $10 million. So very close.
Question about this. Does this take into account the diminishment of the US dollar purchasing power due to inflation? So is this is this a constant dollars analysis, or are we talking in 2024 dollars when we say this?
So whatever value $10 million will be at that time.
Oh, okay. So this would be pre-inflation. So like $10 million in purchasing power of 2024 terms, but in the year 2030, that could be like $60 million.
No, the other way around. This equation tells you what will be the value of Bitcoin relatively to that time. So, for example, if it is 11 millions, it will be 11 millions of that year of 2045.
How can you...
Same thing with Saylor. When Saylor say...
How can you account for that, though? Because you don't know the rate at which dollars will be produced.
It's included in the equation in the sense that somehow the power law has worked all these years, including the inflation. Now, you could go around and say, okay, let me...
So it's looking backwards at inflation and extrapolating it forward.
Yeah, automatically. It's already included somehow in the power law. But you could do this and say, can I adjust it with M2, right? So can I use M2 or can I use, you can, for example, say, okay, let me include 10% inflation rate, whatever inflation rate you want. And then what you get, you will still get the power law, but with a little bit less of a slope.
Sure.
In general, though, the idea is that it's not going to have a huge effect because we are talking about 65 times, right? So you can tell you, okay, Bitcoin will be 65 times. How many times inflation will be?
Well,
maybe a factor of 2.
When the inflation moves into the hyperinflation phase would be the answer to that, because then it's like 50% month over month.
Do you really believe in the hyperinflation? You think it's going to happen?
That's what's happened to every fiat up until now. Why would it not happen?
I think actually Bitcoin will be what doesn't make the US dollar going
by giving people a sound alternative.
It's sound alternative.
But wouldn't that accelerate?
It's almost like a cooling mechanism.
But that would accelerate the hyperinflation, though, because you have people that can sell their dollars more quickly.
We need to study that. And, I don't want to talk about stuff until I spend a lot of time studying it and understanding it. My intuition, just right now, it's my intuition. It is actually a stabilizing effect. But also we can use it to orange peel government, and because we are very scared. And what if we sell it? Say, look, actually, it's going to help with this. It's going, in particular, if we start to say, maybe we can pay back some of the debt using the Bitcoin gains and so on, right?
Yeah.
Like some of the government wants to do. So it could be a stabilizing effect. My idea is that I would like to see Bitcoin being adopted without hyperinflation, because basically at a certain point, it will be clear that you are dealing with $100 trillion asset, right? And it cannot be ignored. And it's really clear that is, helping with the economy, helping with transaction, with different exchanges between nations, maybe even making them agree on the standard should be the dollar, the standard should be the yen. Well, what about something neutral like Bitcoin? So I think, my vision is that Bitcoin will win in that way. Like with the ETFs. The ETFs at a certain point say, we need to join this thing. BlackRock say, we need to join this thing. We cannot fight it. And so if it is hyperinflation, I'm just scared about what hyperinflation will mean.
It's certainly concerning, don't get me wrong. However, I guess I would take the opposite view, that the more clarity there is that Bitcoin is offering people these superior monetary properties, that people are going to switch more of their savings out of dollars into Bitcoin. And that would actually be an accelerant to a hyperinflation, because ultimately a hyperinflation would be, what is the rate at which people are selling dollars versus what is the rate people are selling Bitcoin, right? As that ratio grows, that would be more of a US dollar hyperinflation in Bitcoin terms, which is the same thing as saying Bitcoin price go to the moon, until the US dollar basically is not useful as a unit of account. So there's a lot of factors at play. The other thing, well, I don't know, because the other thing that comes to mind here were the bank runs, the digital bank runs recently, where, a couple of spooked phone calls, and all of a sudden the reserves of, was it Silicon Valley Bank? They were emptied overnight. So liquidity and information moves faster than ever. Right. So I would wonder how that plays into it as well.
Yeah, and I want to study that. That is my next stage, where I want to understand better how this fits with macroeconomy. Because right now, my approach was, I don't even want to touch everything else. I want to understand Bitcoin. I want to use all the internal information, like in an isolated system, because first I want to understand Bitcoin internally. But now, recently, in fact, in my newsletter, I started to look at global liquidity and how it interacts with Bitcoin. So I want to expand, right? So as a scientist, I don't want to talk about stuff I didn't study enough and making just speculation. That is actually my modus operandi. I'm very disciplined about that. And admittedly, so I'm going to spend some time on that.
Admittedly, I am speculating right now. I'm just looking in the history of money and projecting what could happen.
And it's an hypothesis, but it's something that needs to be explored.
Yeah. What's the slide 11 we're going to look at?
So this just shows how why we get a straight line when you have a relationship of this type, right? Where
so when you take the log of the exponent, you're stripping out the... You're plotting the exponent on a linear graph.
Exactly. So the exponent becomes the slope, right? And the beauty of that is that when... so that is the first thing that as a scientist we do when we identify a power law. We want to zoom in on that exponent that is actually the slope of the curve, because it's almost like a fingerprint of a phenomena that you are describing, right? So I'm sure when you were talking with Jeffrey West, you talked about the Kleber's law. In fact, if you don't mind, we can go to that slide where we're at this one, right? So we have all this beautiful...
This is great. And this depicts a lot of these scalar relationships that Jeffrey West highlights in his book across different domains, right? You've got living organisms, planets, the spread of languages, the growth of cities, and then obviously Bitcoin. So please spend some time talking about this.
So the idea is that this is why I put Bitcoin at the center here. It's almost like, okay, Bitcoin then is not an asset, it's a network. And in fact, it's more like nature. It's more like it's a force of nature, and it belongs to all these other phenomena, right? It's a very universal. So physicists really get excited when we find this universal pattern, because this is what really physics is all about. We like to see, we talk about a wave in the ocean, and then light being a
Right.
wave.
One principle to describe widely disparate phenomena.
Exactly. That is really what physics is all about. Because we, in theory, the wet dream of physics is to find one single equation.
The theory of everything.
The theory of everything. It describes everything.
Yes.
Right? Like some kind of seed of knowledge, of information, the mind of God, in a sense, right? That creates everything else. Yeah. And that is where we go, right? This is why we get excited when we see, look, these are very, very different phenomena, but the mathematics is similar, right? The behavior, the scaling proportionality, right? When I make one scale, so again, what we mean for scale, these big, huge changes of 10, 100, 1,000, then the other parameters also scales in this way, right? It doesn't have to be time. Like, for example, this beautiful relationship on the left is the relationship between the body mass of an animal and the metabolism. And how it goes like this. It's that the metabolism is equal or proportional to the body mass of an animal to the 3/4, 3/4. So that slope of that curve and the exponent is 3/4.
So it's a sublinear.
It's a sublinear relationship.
Oh, it's superlinear.
Sublinear.
Oh, it's sublinear. Okay.
Yeah. So it's smaller than one. So now, remember, I told you it's almost like the fingerprint of the phenomena. So it's important to identify that number and understand where it comes from, because this is what you do, right? You don't stop there and say, okay, I found a straight line. As a scientist, you go down, the rabbit hole, and you start to explore. You want to understand where it comes from. Why 3/4, right? You never stop. This is why you have an entire big book and hundreds of papers. So it turns out that, first of all, what are the consequences, right? The consequences are that as you increase the size of the animal, you have a kind of economy of scale. So basically, if you double the size of an animal, you will expect, right, just from an intuitive point of view, that the number of cells doubles. So the energy use is 2 times, right? I double the size of an animal, I get 2 times more energy. The animal needs to eat 2 times more, to survive. Well, it doesn't work like that. It turns out that because of that exponent, 2 to the 3/4 is something like 1.7. So you basically get a discount of 30% by doubling the size of an animal. That means the animal, it's more efficient in using energy and using food. Right. So by the time you go from the mouse, that is on the left side of that graph, all the way to an elephant, you get almost 100,000 times the mass. So an elephant is 100,000 times bigger than a mouse. Now, if you notice on the y-axis, the energy use is only 10,000 times. So basically,
you have more efficient.
This is why a non-linear. So by making this big change, and because it's sublinear, the equation is sublinear, you actually get a discount, right? So instead of getting more, you get less. Right? So it's more efficient. Yeah.
But there's a limiting principle on size too.
There is a limit, and even that is a scaling principle. Right. But the entire idea of this graph, first of all, what we can learn. So you will have imagined that these animals have so much different lifestyles. Some are carnivore, some are herbivore, some are flying. And so notice actually, you can learn even things like that, like the birds are slightly away from that straight line. They are still kind of along the straight line, but a little above it means they need to use more energy, right, given their weight, because they are flying. So you learn a lot of interesting things. There is a very nice pattern. Human beings are about 100 watts, right? That is like a bulb, right? We need like the energy of a bulb, right? It's really interesting. Men consume more energy than women, so I don't know,
testosterone.
You can argue otherwise. Science says there is a difference between men and women, at least in terms of energy.
And our life expectancy is slightly lower too.
Yeah,
right? Which
and science, tells you, these are real, real differences. And so you can learn a lot of things. And the fact that nature found a way of giving this advantage to animals, right, by being bigger and larger, so it's more difficult to predate these animals. It would have been impossible to have an elephant if you didn't have that discount, because by the time the elephants are already eating all the time. The they will have to eat 10 times more food. It will be impossible.
Sure.
We will not have these beautiful creatures,
Right.
elephant with big ears and trunk.
And so these economies
such a
of
pity,
scale, they also are reflected in cities?
So, and they are reflected like in planets, for example, right? And with the planets, the distance of a planet from the sun is proportional in this way. In fact, in that number is 2/3. So the exponent of that relationship, the distance of a planet versus how long it takes the planet to go around the sun. It's a beautiful power law. In fact, the first power law that was ever discovered, that one.
And it's Copernicus?
Kepler laws.
Kepler.
Kepler's law.
Okay.
And you can think, our entire modern civilization started with a power law, because these were the scientific discovery and the fact that we recognize, nature is mathematics, describe mathematics, and the scientific method base, what Kepler, it's a really big thing. These power laws are so important, and the fact that the Bitcoin is a power law, is so consequential, that is really the beginning
there are
of everything.
regularities for us to incorporate into our knowledge, basically.
Exactly.
Know, right?
And to me, it's like, if you had to find a single pattern that describe Bitcoin, you will want to be a power law, nothing else.
Yes.
You will want one of these things. Like, it's like planets, it's like animals, it's like cities.
It's nature,
and it's like nature. And then cities, right? Language, first of all. Like you will imagine. So in this case, what we are seeing here is how regular different words are. How many times the and whatever, whatever table, light, and you can organize them in terms of how many times the word is repeated and then the ranking, right? So the word that is repeated most is going to be number 1, the second one 2, etc. And if you organize them, they became a power law.
Wow.
It's incredible. And all these lines superimposing there are all the different languages, even ancient languages like ancient Egyptians, Latin, Chinese. It doesn't matter. From all the different cultures, we organize like power law.
Wow.
It is amazing.
Now, what does it mean that the living organisms and planet charts are up and to the right, languages and cities are down and to the right? What is the difference there?
So in this case, that graph of the languages is what is called a distribution.
Okay.
So that means how many given a certain quantity. So sometimes power laws show up in what are called distributions, and sometimes they show up in the direct relationship between those two quantities. They're still power laws, but slightly different way of representing the data. And so in this case, for example, the left side will be the most cited word, the most used word. So this is why you have a bigger value on the left side, and then the words on the right side will be the words that are not less frequent.
Yes.
Right?
Okay.
So you can also have, this is very similar what is called the Pareto distribution.
Okay.
That is about wealth.
The 80-20 rule.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that it was another Italian mathematician, Pareto, that he found out that is a power law. Again, the wealth of different nations and different people, because some people are more active and they accumulate more wealth, etc. Other people.
And that's another one of those laws that applies across domains too, because it applies to the mass of stars.
For example, even ants. I mean, there are some ants that work more than, and other ants that are lazy, and you can organize them like that. It's really cool.
Astrophysics, biology, economics,
and cities. Because one of the criticism that I hear often, that is like a kind of mental block of many Bitcoiners. They say, well, okay, planets are power laws. Biology is a power law. Maybe words are a power law. But human beings, human behavior cannot be. It is. And I know you are an Austrian economics person, etc. But certain things are, okay?
Yeah.
Maybe others are not.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at the picture from above, and looking at general behavior like the GDP of a city, it does organize. In this case, what we are looking there is very similar to the Pareto distribution. We're looking at the size of a city, like what is the size of many cities of a certain size you have in a nation. So you have different nations, and then they are organized like this, like power law distributions. But you can look at, like we already discussed, so this entire book, if you guys read the book, you will find out all these different properties. The other day, there was somebody was challenging me, say, okay, what about history? History for sure doesn't follow power law. So it took me like 10 minutes search on Google. I found out, for example, that the time in between conflicts is a power law. And not just that, like there is an entire TED talk that is called the math of war. And the entire talk is about the different power laws that show up. Even, for example, the number of casualties in a war follow a power law. Like the number of casualties versus how dangerous is the casualty, and so on. So there are patterns.
I'm reminded here of we had Robert Grant on the other day, and there was something in ancient alchemy. I think maybe this was from the book The Kybalion. Says chance is another name for law not yet discovered, something to that effect. So that's sort of what you're operating at the edge of that, right? Like you're looking at these random patterns, but you're finding them falling into a consistent framework or shape, behavior. Yeah.
And of course, it allows for individuality because, first of all, even in the first graph, right, you see how we go from the planets where there is almost no individuality at all. In fact, I will suggest everybody to try at least once in their life to download the data and reproduce that graph because, first of all, you can see that nature really behaves in this very regular fashion. And it's beautiful to see that straight line. You actually created it yourself. Right. And nowadays with ChatGPT, etc., you can ask ChatGPT to do that for you, to get the data, etc. But you can see how regular it is. It's really like particles, and then you go to organism, and now you have a little bit more individuality. You see, they don't perfectly follow the straight line. Kind of,
and
right?
this does challenge the Austrian framework, and that's very interesting too, because I agree with the Austrian school that there are only you can only say about man must act, right? You can't say deterministically what he will do. It's just that he will use means to pursue ends. However, when you plot millions or billions of people acting, they fall into these patterns.
And
so there's some
continuity, but also it can be consistent with it, right? Because of individual action is one thing, and then how the actors act together, it gives you enough freedom because. And so,
sorry to interrupt. A lot of people have challenged, for instance, Jason Lowery's thesis, right? Saying, he's not looking at the world through a praxeological lens. He's looking at the world through the lens of physics, and that is a misapplication to human action. But what you're saying here is there's a deeper continuity between the two.
Correct. Yes. And the idea will be, well, as you go to more and more complex systems, there is more and more freedom at the individual level, right? You see there is more noise with the cities. It's not as regular, right? By the time you go to Bitcoin, you can see it's much more noisy. There is that straight line, but there is
the free will manifesting itself.
There are some individual events, like, for example, COVID, right? There is a dip with COVID, that was a black swan. The system reacted to that, but it reacts and then it does certain things, like, for example, when you arrive to that barrier where it cannot be crossed, the price bounce back, right? And in general, the general behavior, the general trend still follows the math. So it's a balance between the two, giving enough freedom and randomness in the system, but at the same time, in general, in average, the system follows a particular path. So it's actually the best of both worlds in a sense.
Yes.
Right?
Let's go to the next slide. We've got about an hour left here. I'm just trying to keep us on track to make sure we hit all of this.
Maybe we want to look at these. This is just a second here, the upper one. If you don't mind, I want to spend a second on this. This is just a list of many physical laws that are all power laws. It's a really long list. Almost anything you can imagine. I will not say everything is a power law, but the majority of laws in physics
you have
are
mass,
power laws.
Strength, electrical conductance, is that it?
And again, people will have a chance to
kinetic
look at
energy. So it's ubiquitous.
It's
basically.
ubiquitous.
Yes,
And again, it makes me happy to see Bitcoin among these
of course.
natural phenomena.
It would be concerning if Bitcoin weren't, right?
Yeah, exactly. I will say, I will be worried if everywhere. It's so natural to find power laws in Bitcoin that you will be saying, what is going on?
This image here is where I actually discovered your work and saw it on Twitter. And the central image here of the Bitcoin feedback loop, right? Which describes the process of Bitcoin's monetization, essentially.
Yes.
And it feeds back on itself. And this was one of the most mind-blowing, when I first discovered this, again, I saw this in a presentation somewhere, I think. I wish I could attribute the actual source, but I created that particular image in
so
Microsoft
glad.
Excel and put it in one of my published essays.
I
So when I
love
saw
it.
you publishing this online, you this was the centerpiece of your work. I was like, oh, I wanted to look into this, and that's what got me looking into your work.
Fantastic. You see, everything is connected.
Yes,
right?
yeah. And also the feedback loop is fascinating too, because I've found that that's how nature really operates. I mean, you see this a lot in biology,
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
We often think, the Newtonian model, A causes B causes C, linear causality, billiard ball model of the universe, but that's not actually how it works. It's every time cause and effect are mutually interactive in a way. And so that's more the feedback loop model.
I adore this graph because this is really the essence, right? If we had to choose one single graph for this presentation, I would say this one. And I'm so happy that actually you created it. So first of all, thank you. And
thank you to whoever I got it from, because I didn't create it.
I'm going to attribute you as the creator of it graph. But I did add one thing that is the difficulty adjustment, because I think is also a very important component. It's almost like, this, it's like a thermostat,
That's right.
So it's some kind of, because also that is another thing that we find often in nature, where there is some kind of inhibitory phenomena, like, for example, prey and predator, right?
Yes.
If predators are too much, then they
They'll
don't have
a
enough
population
food,
collapse.
And so, they control each other.
Right.
So, or, in the brain, for example, we get excited about something, we get this burst of adrenaline or whatever, but then we need to bring back that excitement, because otherwise we will do crazy things. So we have a bunch of other, or even the muscles, right? You have the inhibitory type of muscles, where if you do one action in one direction, you are balanced by the other muscle in the other direction.
There's all this opponent processing that's pervasive in nature. Yeah.
So you see that a lot. And Satoshi was a freaking genius adding that difficulty adjustment. And is also a very important component in why we have these beautiful power laws, because it's another feedback loop there, right? Hash rate goes too far, I want to bring it back. I want to adjust it, right? And it's fantastic, because in this way you get both growth and stability at the same time. It's really the best of both worlds. And so the idea is that I remember when I told you the M is kind of a fingerprint of a phenomena, right? If you put your hands on that, then you get all this insight about what is going on with the phenomena, what is fundamental about that phenomena. Like, for example, with the Kleber's law, what is fundamental, that there is this economy of scale, right? And then in the book and in the paper, they show the rabbit hole that tells you where it comes from, what are the causes. And it turns out, if you remember, the story has to do with the circulatory system that, that is actually supposedly is the area of a vessel, and the volume of how much blood goes through, that will have to be 2-3, but because it's so, the vessels are so ubiquitous, and they became almost like a fractal, right? It's almost like actually our body is 4-dimensional, but not quite, so it's 3/4, right? Do you remember the story that is very, very cool, that as humans, we are almost like 4-dimensional, not quite. That is why you have a 3/4. So once you start to explore these things, these power laws, they are really, really deep topic. You can learn a lot of things. Same thing with Bitcoin. I couldn't, for months and months, I was torturing myself. I was thinking, where that 6 come from? Where the 6 come from? Why 6? What is the origin of that 6? And then, this was when I actually started to interact more with the X community, and people were talking to me, were giving me feedback. So I still remember I went to sleep. I couldn't sleep. And I was thinking about this damn 6. And then I said, you already found all these other power laws. Can you put them together? You found one between price and addresses and time. Let's go back and measuring them again, because I didn't remember the exponent. I know that we were power law, but and then when I plotted all of them, hash rate, addresses, price, I realized, addresses grow with the power of cube. the price reacts to the addresses with the square. So basically we have price equal addresses square, but that grows with the cube of time. We have a power of 6, right? Because the time to the cube squared give you time to the 6. And now we know why we see that beautiful power law in time, because there is adoption, right? So this is why the diagram, because if you read the diagram, right, it says, okay, there is demand of store of value that is starting with Satoshi. Satoshi created this. He said, okay, I'm going to put my energy and time and focus on this thing and this creation. That attracted his friends, right? Is cyberpunk people say, okay, yeah, this is a cool project. Let's help Satoshi with debugging. And Alfini started to run away. I remember that post, right? I'm running Bitcoin.
Yes,
so he's
Bitcoin,
using
right.
his energy at home, and he's putting some money and some energy, right? That we are linked, and his mental energy in the system, and that's what he does. And so at every step, I show the relevant power law, right? In that case, is the power law of adoption, which grows with the cube. And then you go to the next step, because that increase in demand, and I would change the word demand, because it's more like the demand and supply, and with Bitcoin doesn't work like that. It's more like adoption, right? So simply, I want to join the network, right? And it's a sort of demand.
I mean, demand works here, in my opinion, because it's ultimately demand to hold the asset, right? And not sell it.
Exactly.
So
and that
is equivalent to adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so and then the next one relevant is how the adoption relates to price, right? Through the Metcalfe law. So it's a direct relationship. Increasing adoption makes the growth of the price because of this relationship, the square. That is actually, if we double the number of people, we get 4 times the value, right? Because it goes up with that square, right?
Yeah.
It's that multiplicative effect. It is amazing, because if it was this were, and is a it's a philosophical issue. This is why demand, because usually demand for an asset should bring the price linearly up, right? But in this case, because it's adoption.
Well, here's the thing: is because my counter argument to that, or counterpoint to that, would be that Bitcoin is the first asset with a perfectly inflexible supply schedule.
Yeah.
So that all demand registered against it actually is expressed in the price, not necessarily non-linearly, but more likely to be non-linear, because there's no supply response to accommodate additional demand. So all the increases in demand have to be expressed in price.
I need to explore more there, because anytime I try to include it mathematically, like, okay, where the supply, the fixed supply comes in. Now, it's a beautiful concept. If you think about in terms of physics, it looks like energy conservation.
That's
so
right.
It's one of these invariants that are very fundamental. Because power laws are also about invariant, right? Because that slope is an invariant of a system. Like I change.
It's like Bitcoin mirrors the second law of thermodynamics very nicely.
So there is some kind of conservation of energy or conservation of money that I want to develop. That will be another direction that I want to explore. But right now, I don't know yet. I want to understand why the price, how in the heck something that is traded in the market, etc., knows to value itself like if it was a network. I don't know exactly the mechanism yet. It's something that I want to explore. But the beauty of the data says it is. Like, look at that nice relationship, right, between price and addresses. That is the Metcalfe law. And then when you combine these two things, they give you price versus time. That is the power of 6. Now, the next step, right, is that increase in price attracts the miners, right? That is what in that loop, verbatim, this is what it says. Now, what is the relevant power law? Is the power law between the price and the hash rate. So it turns out that is hash rate equal price square. Now, I have a theory why that is true. It goes like this. The price increases. That brings more hash rate, because people say, "Whoa, now I can make more money.
Mining is more profitable,
make it more profitable." And so, but you will expect a linear relationship. Why is a square? Well, because when the difficulty adjustment kicks in, it needs to compensate for the price, but it needs also to compensate, and the increase in hash rate due to the price increase, but it needs to compensate also for the fact that the mined coins are also proportional to the price, right? So to keep everything in equilibrium, it needs to adjust for 2 times of price square relatively to the price. So the hash rate is going to be proportional to the price square because of this. And it's kind of a order of magnitude argument, right? Like a back of the envelope calculation. But I actually did a simulation of that, and I got exactly. But in this case, what that means is not that the hash rate drives the price, it's the other way around. It's the price that drives the hash rate. The only place, like we discussed it before, where the hash rate drives the price is the bottom. It's the only place. And I did all these causality studies where I did show that actually that is the case.
So again, you're giving credence to the feedback loop, right? That the causality changes based on where we are in the market cycle.
Where we are on the market cycle. Now, and then the next step is what? That increase in hash rate brings more security, right?
Yes.
Because now it's more difficult to do the 51% attack.
Right.
And many people criticize that. We say, well, the average user doesn't think like that. Oh, there is more security in the system. Let me buy.
Yeah,
but you know what?
You could also credit it again back to imitation, right? It's where more it's more widely adopted.
I'm sure the banks do. Because they are not going to invest $100 million in Bitcoin and thinking
it's also reflected in liquidity, right? The daily liquidity. Yeah.
Exactly. But also, there is some reasoning about, look, there is all this infrastructure where all these companies invest in hundreds of million dollars in mining facilities. So the system is maturing and is growing, and there is all this investment. So if not me and you, for sure the banks are considering all these things. And then given the banks are investing more, then me and you say, whoa, BlackRock is buying Bitcoin, so maybe I should buy too.
Exactly.
So indirectly, unconsciously, I think that security increase brings in more adoption is a fundamental component.
For sure. Again, that where you talk about like these winner-take-all effects, right? Where you see an industry consuming more electricity, right? That's an indication that it is bigger or more successful than others. And so in some market spaces, especially like money, you want the deepest and most liquid market, right?
Exactly.
That's why gold, money historically tended towards a winner take all effect where we ended up with gold as the global standard, because everyone wants the deepest and most liquid market, because that's what the purpose of money is to trade it for something else.
Exactly.
So you would expect Bitcoin as digital gold to have a similar power law effect.
And then the loop closes, right? Because that increase in security brings more adoption and blah, blah, blah. And so it's a fantastic thing, right? And it's almost mystical because, this idea of it's almost like the Ouroboros, right? The snake that eats its own tail. And it's like an ancient symbol of infinity. So it's called the soul of the world, right?
The most ancient symbol.
That there is no beginning and there is no end.
Exactly.
It's all a cycle, that repeats itself at its own pattern, etc.
Yeah.
And again, that Bitcoin is like, when I saw this, I say, it's amazing because you see Bitcoiners are coming up with this intuition. So we are understanding it from, let's say, a philosophical point of view. And then the mathematics backs up exactly the intuition.
Yes.
Like Saylor saying that it's a digital city. Well, digital cities behave like power laws.
Right.
And so...
And to echo your earlier point, the difficulty adjustment is perhaps the most philosophically fascinating thing about Bitcoin, because it's the first asset that actually adapts to our attempts to produce it. So it is... It is moving, it is countervailing our efforts to extract it more quickly. So it is almost like it's been called a digital organism, I think, by Hal Finney, right? He said it's the first digital organism.
Absolutely.
Because it is actually adapting to our attempts to get
organisms need to have, this is why I call this an inhibitory process, right? And it looks like a negative thing, but without that inhibition, you will not be able to exist like an animal, right?
We would have mined all the Bitcoin by now if we didn't have the difficulty
like
adjustment.
Organisms, right? They eat and need to have some kind of inhibitory system. Say, I'm full,
right?
Don't eat more because you're going to feel sick, right? The food is going to become poison if you eat too much of it. There are people that died because they challenged themselves, to drink too much water in a party or so on, and they died, right? Even a good thing can be bad if you have too much of it or too quickly. So that difficulty adjustment is genius. It's so simple, right? You just proportionally adjust the difficulty to mine that block, right, by proportionate to the hash rate. And it's fantastic because it's the first asset. I don't know of any other asset that is like that. It has this inhibitory process. So it really makes it like an organism. So it's incredible that we have 6 power laws at every stage of this circle. But it will have been strange if we didn't find any power law at all, So it's almost like, it's obvious that you're going to see power laws in this system.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing. And then all those, we think these are just metaphors or analogies. Bitcoin is a city, Bitcoin is a language, Bitcoin is an organism. But it is it's actually real. All of those things
and the mathematics,
in the sense of power laws.
Exactly. It backs up. From a physics point of view, when you make these analogies, when we say that light is like a wave, we are not kidding. It's not it's poetry in a sense, but it's the poetry of nature, the poetry of reality. It's real. There are real one-to-one correspondence between the water waving and light waving. Now, there are also differences, right? Sure. And you have to understand both the similarities and the differences. But at the same time, if you abstract and you go to this level where you see, it's one thing, right? They have the same behavior. Yeah. It's really beautiful.
And the double slit experiment on the light waves, it's how the observer is looking at it, right? Whether it manifests as wave or particle. And there's some similarity here with Bitcoin.
I think that's too, because you can say, if you look at the daily price, for example, right, you see that chaotic behavior and is all undetermined, and is like another asset. You can really predict what is going to do tomorrow, and you have that unpredictability, etc. So that could be an analogy, right? When you look at it in that way. When you zoom out and you see the overall behavior, because even on the slit experiment, if you see just the single little dot, you don't see a pattern. If you just could see every single little dot, you see one dot here, one dot there. It looks chaotic. And then when you look at the collective behavior, you start to see this pattern. You start to see these interference patterns. And so that could be a very good analogy that is very relevant. It has this yin and yang type of behavior too. That is, again, you could write an entire philosophy book derived from the property of a power law.
Yeah, it's beautiful. What's the next slide we're going to here?
Yeah, so this is the Metcalfe law, that basically it turns out...
This, just real quick, the visual representation of why the connections or edges scale nonlinear to the number of nodes, right? Because each time you add a node, say you've got this middle one here, right? You've got 5 nodes and I guess 10 or 12 possible connections. Yeah. If you add one more node, well, you've increased the number of connections by 5 or 6.
Right.
So that's one node for 5 or 6 more connections. And then as you add another node, you've added 7. So it's super linear.
It goes like this, roughly, right? Because the mathematics is a little bit more complex, but in physics, we like to do rough approximations. Fermi, actually, another countryman, he was a genius on these kind of things. Sometimes we were going with the students on a car in a countryside, and he would say, "Hey guys, tell me how many rabbits there is in that field." From first principle, come up with a rough estimates of how many rabbits there are there, how many piano tuners there are in Chicago. Right. How am I supposed to calculate that? Yeah. So roughly, it goes like this. I say you have one node, and you have to connect with n number of nodes, right? So you are n and one person, and you need to connect with n number of Bitcoiners. But how many of these connections there are? Well, it will need to be multiplied by the number of Bitcoiners. So n times n squared. This is how it goes, right? So roughly, right, intuitively.
Right. But then there's the coefficient of network density you mentioned earlier. So
right,
it could be dialed up or dialed down.
Complicated. This means everybody's connected to everybody else. That is not realistic. So you can make more realistic calculations, But roughly should be, for sure, is more, like you say before. It should be, the connection should be always more than the number of nodes. But in an ideal situation like this, it's kind of like a square. Now, if you include everybody, it turns out that you have this n square. When you look at all the addresses and with non-zero balance. And I think we have a slide. I don't know if it is the next one. Let's go to the next slide, maybe. Okay, this is the S curve that it doesn't apply, right? That is the entire point. So this, if you go to the previous one, this one shows better what I was showing before. That it's a more of a zoom in. So the first line is how the addresses are growing. That is basically a power law with the cube. Then the second one is basically Metcalfe law, that there is this relationship between price and addresses that is close to square. And when you combine them together, you get to the power law in time. This is how it goes, right? And now, see, we go beyond having just like a pretty line. We are trying to find causes, right? So we are doing physics, because physics always trying to find what cause and effect, right? So and again, it will be very unlikely to find something like this by chance, right?
Sure.
How likely is that something like this is due to chance? It's almost impossible.
Almost zero, yeah.
And if you go to the next slide, so this is why cube is interesting, because there are a lot of viruses that under certain conditions, in particular when we have inhibitory processes, they became power laws. And maybe we can go to the next slide. So this one is very nice because what did they do here? I took different cutoffs, right? So I look at all the addresses with zero balance, and basically what we described before. The addresses grow with the cube of time. They have there is a relationship between price and addresses with the square. And now one could ask, what happens if I look at this will be the shrimp, or everybody, including the whales, etc. So now let's be more selective. Let's look at addresses with 0.1 Bitcoin balance, so 0.5, 1 Bitcoin balance, or whatever. And this is what this graph is. Like, for example, the first one is the growth of all these addresses. You see that they are all power laws, but they have a different slope. The steeper one above is everybody, that it goes with the cube. And as you go to higher and higher balances, they grow slower. Because, of course, these are large wallets. You're going to have fewer of them. The total number of them is going to go slower. In fact, if you go, I don't remember what was, but something on the order of 10 Bitcoins. If you go all the way to 10 Bitcoins, that is the most slope. It's about almost 1. It's linear, linear in time. And then this second graph shows how impactful every address is. So the steeper one in that case is the whales, the 10 Bitcoin wallets. They are very steep. So that means we have a huge impact. So it's almost close to 6, that number. So if you change, if a whale move a little bit of money, that for them is a lot of money, right? For us it's a lot of money, but it's a portion of their wallet. They are going to have a huge, big impact. It makes sense, right? Because these are how whales move the market.
Yeah.
So
slower growth in total whale addresses, but more of an outsized impact on price because they hold more Bitcoin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then when you combine them together, they all give us the power law that we love and know, right? We know and love. So they all, because the red line, you see how the red lines, that is the model created by the combination of the two. You don't get quite the bubble, because that means probably the bubble are not even moved by adoption. It's all FOMO. You see how the red line doesn't reproduce very nicely the bubble. It doesn't really respond to the bubble. But the general trend, you see, it's replicated by just combining the two graph above.
Yeah.
So it almost perfectly reproduces the power law. And the beauty is, all these, no matter if you're a whale, a shrimp, or whatever, all of us contribute to this power law equally. That is
fascinating.
It's really interesting.
Where are we today, like in terms of what the power law predicts versus where we are in terms of
we
price?
Are costing the power law right now. We are since February. We are almost like parallel to the power law.
So we're right on target.
We're almost right on target.
Okay.
But actually, it's a little bit too early, because usually, because the power law also follows a particular pattern, because that is the other component that we are not discussing much. There are two things that in science we love about systems, when they are scale invariant, like Bitcoin, or when they are periodic, like the planet or the orbit of an
some regularity.
And Bitcoin is both, right? It has these 4-year cycles that are very regular, very precise, and usually goes like this. In fact, if you want to go to the next slide, this is the city, the Ouroboros, all the memes actually are expressed by mathematics. This is a simulation that I made that we can discuss maybe another time. But this graph, this is one of my favorite graphs. So this graph, first of all, what that graph shows, that red line, I think that red line is the real power law, is where the real power law is. It's basically that support line that is at about 60% from the general trend. And it's really a physical limit. It's really driven by real economics, real physics, the physics of mining. So basically, what happens that if you go to that red line, that is the cost of production of Bitcoin. And the system reacts in such a way that if you try to bring the price even below that, it wants to go back. And in fact, even COVID, that is one of the bumps that you have all the way on the right, it's a very sharp bump there. It touched that point and then it bounced back. And it's almost like it was like kind of a stress test for the system, for this theory, right? With a black swan event like COVID actually showed that the system can react to it, it's flexible, it's resilient, because these are also property of power law. This is why you find them in organism, etc. And it was able to adjust itself.
Yeah, so and you can see an almost like what would appear like a physical bounce off of that line as well.
Physical bounce, right? Like a ball bouncing from a wall. And you can obtain this curve in many different ways. You can use percentile, you can say, and go to show the smallest percentiles, deviations from these. You can use what is called ransack, that is a method where you eliminate outliers. So you say, I want to look at the largest deviations from the general trend and going to exclude that are the black dots and the blue dots. I have a graph of this where I just plot the blue dots and you get almost scared because they are so incredibly aligned. You say, how in the heck the price of Bitcoin knows to go back there, you know? Like, and this is what I was telling you about the cycle, because if you think about, okay, let's look at the bottom, right? Typical bottom. And by the way, I want to let everybody know the fact that the bubble looks smaller and smaller in terms of time, it's an artifact of a graph, because we are basically compacting time by taking the log. But they all last about 2 years. Every bubble lasts about 2 years. It takes 1 year to go up, 1 year to go down. And now the other 2 years, we're spending in that red line. You see how we are costing that red line? The first two cycles actually almost perfectly, but we are still kind of parallel to this red line, right? So we spend 2 years in the red line and we go up. So basically we have 2 years up along the power law, 1 year even more up when we go up. In fact, that is exponential. That growth is exponential. And then 1 year down. So basically Bitcoin, you know that meme we say 3 green bars and 1 red bar? Again, it's real. You know, so we go up even during the bear market. The 2 years when we're spending close to the bottom, we still go up, right? And fast with that power of 6. But then you see another thing that this graph shows is almost like the bubble didn't exist, because you see how they cancel each other, right? You go up exponentially. It's almost like you go say, you know, I do this exponential thing, but I don't care about it. You know, I'm going to cancel it with going down in the same way. Right? Because look at this. How is possible that after 2 years, the price knows to go back to that red line? Has to be something real and physical. You know, come on. You know, I cannot, I don't know anybody coming and say, oh, it's an illusion. It's a model. It's not a model. It's Bitcoin.
I would just throw some caution out here though. Like, people would say, oh, well, let me just trade this, right? Every time this thing is above the red line, let me sell it and then wait to buy it when it goes back to the red line. I would just throw some caution out there that models are useful, but they're never, the model is always a representation of reality. Right. And so you could, in trying to outsmart Bitcoin, you could get clobbered, right?
But
and this is back to the earlier point where I was saying I have some concerns around actual hyperinflation of fiat currencies, that it would destroy these models at some point, where Bitcoin would just deviate from that growth. Like when the US dollar, if the US dollar were to hyperinflate, for instance, this model would deviate from that red line and never return.
Okay,
right?
so we have Argentina as an example, right? So I plotted the Argentinian pesos, and it does follow power law up to recent times, and then you can start to see there is a deviation. Now, one of the things I want to do as a service, I'm going to create a website. Do you remember all the parameters in that differential equation that they show you, the theta, etc.? Every day I'm going to post what the equations, what solving the differential equation tell us, right? Is that theta close to 0? If it is close to 0, will be an exponential. It is close to 1. So do we change, right? So we will have a website where everybody can go and look at all the network parameters. So we get like a state of the day in terms of network properties. What are the network properties of Bitcoin? So the usefulness of a model like this is also that it will help us to monitor and know what is going on and alert us, right? We are leaving the power law. We are saturating. You know, we are coming. So it's actually good to understand, because knowledge is good, right?
Sure, for sure.
Knowledge is power.
What's the next slide?
But I want to answer very quickly about your idea, about trading. Some people do want to trade, and I think that if you do it cautiously, like, don't do something stupid where you think that we are reach the top according to this model, because this model can help you, tells you, like, there are these 2 standard deviations, we are probably close to a top. Don't do anything stupid like selling all your Bitcoin. Do you want to maybe buy some put calls against most a MicroStrategy, maybe so you can multiply, do it cautiously, right? And make a plan, maybe I sell 10%.
Right.
Will you be against selling 10% and maybe you can
to each their
rebuy?
own, and freedom above all. I just wanted to say,
be cautious.
It's the classic thing. If you think you found a crystal ball, you're probably going to eat glass.
Absolutely.
Kind of
That is stupid, because it's still an asset, it's still, there is that noise and that indetermination, etc. But
and it's depicting a complex adaptive system that is beyond modeling in its reality, right? Like we may find models that are very useful and can see it in a certain way, but that doesn't mean we can predict the future. Basically.
But if you are doing something cautiously, and
right,
with awareness, and you want to be a little bit more aggressive, I don't see what is wrong
risk
with
and
that,
reward,
right? Why not? And this is a beautiful article that actually there is also a more popular version of this, where we explain the relevance, etc. But it's really cool because we have this graph where we have dinosaurs and all kinds of different crazy animals. In fact, we even say we could use it to make even fantasy animal, because now we have a model of how realistic tooth should grow. And basically, they are power laws. And so look at this: teeth, claws, horns, thorns, beaks, shells.
And this is saying they all follow power laws. Wow.
Beautiful,
Interesting.
And an example of this is the next slide.
Now it mentions here the logarithmic spiral. Is that related
it's the same spiral that I showed.
The Fibonacci sequence?
It's kind of in the same family.
Okay.
Yeah, in the same family of a spiral. And this is an example, because many people say, well, there are power laws, but there are not many power laws in time. Well, it's not true. This is an example of a power law in time. The Kepler's law is a power law in time. This is another one, right? Basically, this is, first of all, is a log-log graph. Why? Because you see how the little tick marks are not regular. That is a sign that we are dealing, and also the change, like a 5, 10, 50. This is a sign that we are dealing with a power law graph, and the article says so. But you have this beautiful straight line. But you see, look, with biology, you still get some irregularities, never perfect, right? Because it's complex animal. But in general, you can see is a general pattern there, right? And about predictability. So will the power law continue to go up in the future, right? In general. Scaling phenomena is when scientists feel the most confident about making prediction, because science is about making prediction. When you want to land a probe on Mars, you're making a prediction of where it's going to land, right? When you launch a rocket to a space stations, you need to be very predictive of where the probe is going to be, where the rocket is going to go. So it's important to understand, can we use this scaling idea to make some rough prediction of where Bitcoin is going. Because I think actually, many people think that it's comforting to know that, many people contact me via DM and say, Giovanni, I was on the fence about buying Bitcoin, but now that I think, and, I always tell, don't take it as gospel, right?
Sure.
Think about as very likely is continuing to do this, and people find it comforting that we have a clear path to $1 million, that we see this horizon, we know where we are going, and many people actually decided to buy Bitcoin and be Bitcoiner for the first time. I have several of these DM that is one of the motivation. It makes me really happy, more than anything else, to have that feeling that I'm orange peeling people, it is amazing.
This is that beautiful alignment inside of Bitcoin between individual self-interest and, the greater good, basically.
Exactly.
What benefits others benefits you and vice versa.
Yeah, not many things are like that, right? That you feel like to be part of something much bigger than you. It gives you motivation and purpose, it's so beautiful. And even the other day I was seeing, Cardone, him? He had this space, and there was the 17 years old, and there was the lawyer, and there was the scientist, and there was the businessman. Where else you find that? Nowhere. Just Bitcoin,
It's a very diverse city.
And so that graph that I was showing before, I was saying, you could say, look, the elephant had this growth up to 10 years. Can I make an extrapolation and say what the size of a task, in this case, is the radius of a task of the elephant? First of all, you see how the female is shallower, because it tells us something, right? The male need of this task to fight, for courtship or whatever. So there is a reason why it's steeper, so you can always understand something by looking at these graphs. But it's very predictable.
And shorter life again. It's just men and women.
Right, exactly. I didn't even notice that. You're right. It ends early. And then you can say, if it grew with this pace and this, you can scale it up, right? You can say, it's scaling, you can draw a triangle, right? Under that, and making, like, when you make a triangle that is bigger, right? Everything is kept in proportion. One of the sides A and the sides B, as we make the triangle bigger, they scale up, right? Proportionally. In fact, if you want to understand what scale invariant means, it means simply everything is proportional. But again, it's a beautiful principle.
Yeah, the ratio. The ratios are invariant, right? So like inside of every triangle, it's 180 degrees, no matter which way.
The ratios are invariant. And exactly the same here. The ratios are invariant. And Bitcoin is exactly like that. It's like one of these natural structure that grows in this proportional fashion. And then you can say very likely, right, will continue to be scale invariant. Because also the other way to think about is really another order of magnitude before it reaches $1 million, and Bitcoin did 8 order of magnitude.
Right.
So do you think that for the next order of magnitude,
well, technically 2, right? We need to cross 100,000 and then $1 million.
So we are going to 100,000 and we are going to $1 million, and I think even likely to 10 million, right? And above 10 million is going to be in a very difficult place. It's going to be more valuable.
That's where you get into the territory of like, what does the dollar mean at that point?
Exactly. And I think probably this is when there be hyper-Bitcoinization.
You start pricing Bitcoin in energy or something.
And then probably nations will say, let's adopt Bitcoin, as a standard. I think something critical will happen.
So 15 minutes left here.
Yes.
What other...
this is the proportionality that I was talking about, the triangle, if you want to go to the triangle, but we already discussed it, but just to point it out, right? So because of the relevance of Bitcoin, just go one above, if you don't mind, or a couple above. This one. You see here, this basically I extended the triangle. And by the way, many people don't know that this model came out in 2018. So we have already 5 years of predictions, that red line that you see is what is the new data. So the blue line was up to 2018 when the model came out. And then we say, well, if it continues to behave scale invariant, it should go in that direction. And you can see the prediction was, so we already made a prediction 5 years ago, and we were pretty right? We don't know.
And these
exactly
are the halving epochs that are in the rectangles.
Yes,
the vertical rectangles.
And so you see, it's all a question of extending the triangle and make it bigger.
Right.
And this is what scale invariance means. So you can extend it.
So we've actually, it's moved into the next halving epoch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is the data up to
this is through January 24.
24.
Yeah.
So we have now even more, almost 8 months of data. And it continues to go along the power law. In fact, right now we are touching the power law, basically. Yeah. And so it's not absurd to say, what if I extend it by another order of magnitude, right? And I go to 1 million or even 10 million. It's not unthinkable that it will continue to behave in that way. It's pretty reasonable idea that it will continue to be scale invariant.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, based on what I've seen in this book, and if it is that deep of a principle, you would expect it to hold. Yeah, I mean, again, I get into issues when you're still looking at the world in terms of dollars, and that dollar to me is a very elastic frame of reference where like it could just hyperinflate and go to zero.
I get it.
It could, that sort of gives me some distortion.
Yeah.
But that notwithstanding, I would expect scale
and the beauty of this model that if something like that happens, then we have something to compare. And at a minimum, we will go back and say, well, look, Bitcoin until this point follow this power law.
Yes.
And it's part of the history of Bitcoin.
Now, if you did that in gold or energy, I would say it's almost certainly going to hold.
Well, we did it in gold, and it holds. I can show you. I can send you some pictures. And even here, I think there are some graphs.
My hypothesis would be that in the years ahead, the one denominated in gold would be even more accurate than the one denominated in dollars.
Okay. So then we can agree on that. Yeah. And this graph shows, when people say, why Bitcoin? Well, this is telling everything else is gold.
You are the best performing stocks in human history. These are the best performing stocks in human history.
Amazon, Google, Microsoft. And first of all, you can see we are now power law because we are bending up. That is a sign of exponential. Yeah. Now, this exponential, I have another graph. I will give you all my slides so people can use it as a resource, etc. But that exponential, what is due to that exponential? 90% of that exponential, because it looks like, it's amazing, an exponential. Inflation. Yeah. It's just inflation. In fact, I have a graph where I show what inflation is compared to SP 500.
Yeah, because
most of it,
Because you had marked that at probably March 12th, 2020 when we printed all that money.
Exactly.
And those things started to curve up.
Yeah,
more.
exactly.
So, same for Bitcoin as well.
But Bitcoin, you see, it does its own thing. Yeah. And because it's so powerful, it grow up by 100 million pair. Yeah. It's like almost untouched by inflation. It's like inflation. What the heck it is? So it's an anti-inflationary asset because of its growth. It's incredible. And it's a bit different from everything else. Yeah. It's this beautiful straight line. Yeah. So exponential,
and good. Clearly in a league of its own.
It's a league of its own, in terms both of growth. Because another thing that is a little bit misleading, it looks like, it's higher, but kind of not so much. If I did this in linear, you will not even be able to see all the other assets.
Of course.
Is that people are not used so much. This is thousands of times.
So this is from 10 to the 10 squared. Bitcoin's up around the 10 to the 6th, it looks like.
Yeah,
so
that
is
times. Right? These are the gains,
four zeros, four orders of magnitude higher than NVIDIA,
it's
Amazon.
Incredible. Hundreds of times better asset in terms of returns in a short time. Right. And by the way, I had to use 25 years of these assets because to make it fair, because Bitcoin is traded 24/7, and these guys so there are 256 trading days in a year. So I had to add more time to make it comparable. So this is 25 years of these stocks versus 15 years. And still Bitcoin beats them by a factor of 10,000 times. Or something
so that's
like
why Bitcoin is basically zero for that first
Right,
portion?
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's crazy. It's crazy. It's like Godzilla versus, like little mouse,
Fascinating.
It's incredible. And this is an attempt, if you want to look at this graph, of including the bubbles, because they are also predictable. So I made a model where I have these sine waves. Now, something very interesting, the peaks, this is a recent result, are also decaying in a very predictable fashion. So the R square of that decay, there is still something that I'm trying to wrap my head around because it's supposed to be driven mostly by FOMO, excitement during the bubbles. That decay over time, the size of the bubble, the R square, if you model it like as an exponential, because it's an exponential decay, is something like 0.99. Again, like something that it's so weird to see in a financial asset, So I don't know, I'm still trying to understand, but if you think that there is a decay, this is what the projection, right? That these bubbles are going to be smaller and smaller. So you're going to have actually an asset that grows with the power of a 6, and it doesn't have much volatility.
Right.
It is almost like inconceivable, because yes, maybe you don't have a bubble where you can play, sell, buy, but at the same time makes it much more safe, right? Because
of course.
So almost like you get two things that are contradictory to each other, because usually, when Bitcoin was growing very fast in the beginning, you paid the price of volatility.
Sure.
And now this is telling you, I'm continuing to grow with the power of 6, but I'm going to be less and less volatile.
Yeah.
It seems almost impossible, but let's see what happens.
Yeah, we shall see. So the showstopper here.
Yes.
You have end of 2025 Bitcoin price prediction. Again,
let's do it for fun.
It's a crystal ball.
Where we go from
don't eat the glass.
serious
However,
to fun talk.
Yeah, it's a model.
Yeah.
But your modeling of this asset has Bitcoin at the end of 2025 priced between $210,000 and $250,000.
Yeah.
US.
So this is what is happening. And again, everybody take it with a grain of salt, right? We are doing this almost for fun, but let's see how it goes. So if everything, so the premise is always the same. If everything happened exactly like before, then you can say mathematically should give this, right? You should go. So first of all, the bull we start in November. So we are going to have 1 year of bull. The price is going up from November. It will take 1 year. So the end of 2025, we should reach something close to 200,000, 210, something like that. And then it's going to crash because it's going down again to that support line at about 65,000, and it will take another year. So by the end of 2026, we go back to about 65,000. And the reason why we go back to 65,000 that right now we should be a little bit lower. So it's supported about 30. And the reason why we are around 65 is mostly FOMO due to the ETFs, right? So because you see how usually we are much closer to the bottom, and instead of it, you see that little blue line there is all excitement due to ETF. But it's my speculation about that because I don't have any way to prove that. But it seems like an irregularity, right? But I'm expecting to follow that bubble. But we will see. We will see if that
we will
happens.
see. These are probably the only true words we can say about all this. However,
I really feel confident about the general power law. The bubbles are an add-on, like when you do a model of an object that falls in the atmosphere, and you first say, oh, there is gravity. That is pretty certain. Then
you
let's
need
add
friction.
Wind and friction, etc. So that is what the bubble represent. But the general trend, I don't know. Whatever Bitcoin does, right?
Yeah.
So I trust Bitcoin. I know that it will be good for Bitcoin. I right now, my confidence that there is so much wisdom in this system is our collective wisdom, is us, right? That is us. It's me, you, everybody. And when we work together with purpose and directionality, and we want to do something better than us, we create this magnificent system, right? This is what Bitcoin is, and it has wisdom. So whatever Bitcoin teaches, I am a student of Bitcoin. This is the point. I'm not attached to the power law. I find it beautiful, but whatever Bitcoin shows us, we are learning from Bitcoin. That is really the bottom line of all this. I want to study Bitcoin like if it was something like a force of nature, like something that has wisdom, intelligence, complexity, is not something random, and we can learn from it.
Yes,
that is the fundamental message.
Forever remaining a student of Bitcoin. I think that is a beautiful message to end it on. Giovanni, this has been Very fun. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for joining me in Miami.
My pleasure. And thank you for that graph of a feedback loop. It's so amazing.
You're quite welcome. We will publish the slides, and thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. It was my honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise, my friend.
Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.